this is a new show that we're piloting today, and it's called Next Move with Travis and Eric. And I have a good friend of mine, Eric Maloney. Say hi, Eric.
Hi there, Travis.
He's in New York, and I have a good friend also in the UK, Robert Wakeling.
Hi, Trav.
And the show, really, the premise is there's so much going on in our daily lives, and we're all, been in industry of technology and so on, and everything's moving very, very fast. And so this platform really is to look at, what's on top of mind, what's in everyone's minds out there, and it's going to cover things such as AI, blockchain, mobile communications, and really financial services, because there's so much in the media, so much in the press. We don't know what Bitcoin is, or stable coins, or crypto and altcoins, and there's a lot of confusion what tokenization is, and what really machine learning is, and AI, and how do these things all fit together. And we'll explore in these 15-minute segments on this show on a weekly basis, and bring guests in here, have expertise in various categories. And as a starting point, what I'd like to say is that, let's talk about security. And the reason I bring that up, and it's, a lot of this is not in the headlines. You don't see it in the press and on CNBC or some sort of discussion, but there are massive attacks happening at the core of our financial health systems and so on. I mean, as most of you probably know out there in the audience, is that, we have United Healthcare was shut down, and they brute force hacked them and held them ransom, $20-odd million. No one could get their prescriptions. Hospitals were shut down. No one can get that. I mean, the casinos got hit, Caesars, MGM, they paid up, and so on and so forth. And what you don't see in the press, I know firsthand, because I'm in the banking scene now, is that there's been in the US, and I'm not talking about worldwide, just in the US, regional banks with branch offices, community banks, 25, 30, 40 branches that service that community shut down because of hacks. They got in there, froze the money, caused such a muck that the FBI, the Homeland Security, even Interpol's coming over to look at it and say, what is really going on? Now, of course, they have insurance and the rest of it, but when you're that vulnerable to these attacks and so on, it's a concern for everyone. So I'm not going to get in on this public platform and discuss names and the rest of it. But I want to start with a concept that's been, around for a while, since the beginning of time. And the concept is this: immutable data. And I was introduced to blockchain, in 2017, 18. And I'm a commercial guy with a lot of technical background and so on. But it was explained to me is that, well, in very basic terms, it's like going on a whiteboard with 100 people behind you, and you put 1, 2, 3, 4 up there, and everyone remember that number, and you erase it and walk out and come back in and privately go to each one of them and say, what was the number? And you pick a percentage, 80, 90%, and that's consensus. So we have immutable data. I think everyone understands that Bitcoin was a nice experiment to prove the security, and that the governments couldn't change it and the rest of it. But is immutable data only in this consensus in the cloud? And where I want to introduce, and that's what we all know with all this blockchain, it could be stable coins, Bitcoin, and everything else. And yes, everyone agrees that this new database, and that's really what it is secure. But the subject today, which is interesting, is there other forms of current technological immutable data? And that's where we can get not just, the node consensus in software, but there's immutable data in hardware. And so I see, as a going into the marketplace, is that mobile communications and silicon providers providing what some refer to as secure core silicon that cannot be broken. And maybe I'll ask Robert is beginning. He leads a lot of thought-provoking and technology, has a lot of background in the area of mobile communications and in the area of SIM. And Robert, is this something that people can easily hack? I mean, we're at a very difficult time now. What can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's not very easy to hack. There's the economy of scale. If you spent a lot of money, you could perhaps attack one peer. But in mobile, you've got millions and millions of people carrying mobile devices. So you'd spend a lot of money hacking a system. Just generally, the component, there's a lot of work that's gone into standards from 3GPP and ETSI and the industry in general to secure mobile. 5G in particular is more secure than all the previous iterations of mobile telephony. And then you've got, bless it, the SIM card is a secure element. It's a piece of hardened hardware. It used to, it is still, and will be for a while, on a piece of plastic that you put into your mobile
Right.
phone. And then you've got eSIM, the embedded SIM, which is going inside chipset. So you get, it gets buried even further in another secure layer. So it's very, very secure. For a network of communication between points to points, being humans and other, machine applications, it's very, very secure.
Thank you for that. And Eric, my good friend, is that you have an expertise in so many different areas, but I would say that you have a very nice grasp on AI and how does AI help with data security and so on? Because that must be a concern when we have AI that really is transforming our life, making it easier, helping with things that we had to struggle with and so on. How do you see it from that perspective in AI, machine learning, or software, hardware? Maybe some comments would be from you.
I think I appreciate Robert's insight and the current state. I agree with them about the level of effort for a hack for here and then going after a larger network. The thing about AI is we're now living, instead of an internet time, we're living in AI time. And things that were on the scale of months, maybe now on the scale of days. It's a magnitude faster. It's also something that can be at scale. You can teach AI and then create parallel instances of something that are going to work permutations much more quickly.
Right.
Also, it's self-teaching at a level that if you train it how to look for a vulnerability, it will come back with outliers like, oh, well, yeah, I found something, I didn't find much, but here's something else that's anomalous. So it can find things that people were not necessarily banking on before. So it will find weakest links faster. It will canvas a lot more efficiently. It will be able to aggregate that information with recommendations. We're in the very early days. So I completely agree with Robert about the current state. I don't think the current state's a very long state.
So would you, interesting, it triggers, well, on the AI time, that's very clever you say that, because, when I grew up in tech in Northern California and San Francisco and so on, it's always Moore's Law, right? And what is Moore's Law now? What was that, 5 years before everything's going to be completely new and revolutionized? In AI time, what are we, 90 days, 6 months? I mean, how much are we condensing evolution, right?
If you look at OpenAI, nobody knew of it more than 2 years ago, really, unless you were an insider. And then we've gone through 3 major releases in 18 months, a little bit less, 15 months. And if you go to the amount of capability, each one's growing at magnitude over the previous. So, and the price points are starting to come down. If you look at 3.5 Turbo, it's actually much more cost effective and just as performant as 4. And so you're going to see these iterative improvements. Yeah, when you have multiple generational changes in a year or so, you can't possibly keep up. And it's in spoofing, that's another thing. And we're not going to focus on that today, but when you talk about know your customer, know your business, Robert alluded to knowing your endpoint, these things are going to become more clearly understood by AI, and they're going to understand how to atomize and attack those components as the hackers train them to do that, right? So it's a brave new world, because I think that there is a phenomenal amount of engineering that goes into the SIM, and as Robert said, into the eSIM, and there are amazing things, but they're necessary, because the business as usual won't last much longer. We're going to be seeing revolutionary changes in security architectures and cross-pollinating with blockchain. So now you're going to have this immutable token embedded in very unusual places, and called in very unusual ways that are very hard. Nothing's impossible. It's going to be very hard to replicate.
Yeah, so I see this. Thank you for that, Eric, and and also Robert. I see this as that you have these secure endpoints. It could be a hardware security module, a SIM, and a phone, and so on. Is your points of anchor, and the processing the data maybe is we have this consensus node, and maybe AI looks for the vulnerabilities through the whole holistic thing. Was that kind of what you're saying is you need
That's,
to be aware in a very fast period of time if there's vulnerabilities, and that's where people fall down is they don't
I'll
know.
make a comment and I'll pass it back to Robert. So you have to think of endpoints as obviously on a network, right? A mobile network, on a physical network, but it's also a concept within applications because AI endpoints or any data endpoint, right? So when do you transverse the physical to the software layers? And that's going to be another area of focus. And how do you potentially leverage some of those harder skills in the physical
Sure.
as best practices, elevate some of those concepts up into the software logic layer? So I'll defer back to Robert about his views on this, but I mean, you're in deep thought in this area, and I think you're ahead of the pack, Robert.
Maybe. So, I mean, I'm a big believer in the power of the SIM because of its being a secure element. Everything between it and the outside world could be risky, but it's going to talk to another secure endpoint. So long as the dialogue between those two endpoints is secure, the intermediate hops really don't matter. There could be some interference in that the communication would be broken. Therefore, that actually breaks a process because you can't get the communication through. But the contents of that communication can't be viewed. It can't be altered. And if the endpoint that we're talking to is blockchain, for example, whatever's being generated from the SIM, whatever the application is, it gets recorded. So you can actually check the provenance of the data because there is information available to the SIM. You can check the identity of the, I mean, you could play, I believe you can apply AI techniques to the behavior of that endpoint, call it a human, to look for anomalous conditions when they engage in a transaction. So they don't normally do this thing when they're in this condition. So that would stand out. So I think there's AI for preventative means, but also for detection. And then at the other end, obviously the blockchain, you've proved that the source of the data is from the person who claims to be the individual that originates that data. And then the blockchain keeps a record, and that never disappears. It's always in the chain, and it's transparent. You can see it. You can work your way backwards through transactions, forward through transactions. So everything's secure, not just the transient, the ephemeral data that's going between the two endpoints, but the persistent data at the far end as well.
Actually, that made me think of something. I mean, I started with AI in the worst possible light, right? Being used by hackers in a negative way. Robert's pointing out, obviously, AI is simply a tool set. It's not malevolent. It's not working on its own. The idea, it's going to be employed. People are going to be training it to do things. So Robert's bringing up very good points. It's not only about setting up good practices. It's also about monitoring, AI for monitoring. Also, the massive amount of metadata available through the blockchain to see everything that was attempted, everything that failed, even if it's not malicious, to start seeing issues with transactions at scale. AI will be able to help cure some patterns to examine. So AI can be a very strong force for good, but again, where people used to plan things out over a larger time scale, it's going to be a much more compressed time scale.
Yeah, and what triggers in both your comments here is that we have to have human intervention. Automation is great, AI is great, all this blockchain, mobile communications, and so on. But what I really, really like is we all have one of these puppies in our hands, and we're humans, and nothing can really map the brilliance and genius of the human mind. So that's a spot check, right? I do believe in human intervention at certain points, and that balance between human process and intervention in certain transaction, automation through binary processing and all these different environments of technology is very, very important. So the balance of that, I think, is very, very important. At the end of the day, is that if everything has to stop, if there's a lot of money that's going to be moved, but it's inappropriate or fraud or something, there has to be some stops in that. That's why I like the endpoints. I like the detection on the AI. It gives comfort if these things in maybe call it a hybrid, we're all working in a holistic way, is the future. And I see it today as different camps that can see a future together. And that's really the combination of, I think, that the theme here in the comments of the three of us so far.
Yeah, I mean, on the default, I mean, if you've got a process which is managed by AI and it can't cope with it, and it defaults to human interaction, you could argue, you could have a discussion around that. Because if you take an analog, like you're driving an autonomous car, and something happens and it can't cope with the conditions, it comes to default. It basically just gives control back to you as the human, and that might not be the appropriate thing to do because you might not be in a condition or be able to react fast enough.
That's right.
So you could argue that there should be a lower level AI function that at least does something, because you might not be able to cope with it. Maybe it's going to be sort of human assist rather than just giving it to the human. That would transfer to transactions. It could be you do see anomalous behavior because you've got AI running across vast quantities of data, more than a human can consume, and probably more than can be processed by procedural logic. You've got AI looking at it. And then you start outliers pop up, and that could go for reference to someone to just give it a little rubber stamp and say, yes, that's okay, and it passes through. But there would be levels of control given back to good old-fashioned human beings.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point. In the world of AI architectures, you do have all these at play. You definitely have human in the loop as a common default, and it's the best way to learn and build processes. But obviously, there's scale issues and perfection issues. I think as we're in these early days, as I said, people don't realize it's like the early days of software. You used to have ledger on paper, and then people said, let's put it into the machines. And they said, that's great. Then they say, we used to have 15 errors that we would catch a week. Now we're catching 2,000. And the answer is yes, you've automated a bad process. You have to learn how you've manually corrected things in the physical ledger because the humans had the time and the introspection to do it. It was their job. And you put it into a computer, you do your best to write the algorithms to understand the process and to digitize it. But you didn't realize how suboptimal it was. And sometimes even today with some legacy applications a few years old, we're seeing how hard it is to upgrade that to a modern application architecture. And now the same thing is probably going to be happening here in communications. And I think what we're always seeing is this concept of zero trust. You always have to come back, and it comes back, as Robert was saying, I may have this start under one AI service, but if I lose telemetry, this AI won't work so well. I have to revert to a different one that uses other forms of telemetry. But they have to have the consistency of trust. So they're in the same process, and they're supposed to be there, and they're in the right context of the process for the transition or the review. It's quite complex, but it's very important. But it comes down to trust.
Yeah, it dawns on me that, one of my favorite advisors personally in Cambridge, England, told me, says, the more you know, the more you do not know. And I think it applies to everything in the quest of technology and human experience and the rest of it, because like you said, is what you know now is going to be different tomorrow. And especially with all these combinations of AI and tech and so on, automation and so on, is it's a brave new world. And what we don't know is, it's going to be very interesting in the days to come. Well, we've actually hit our time. I've told all of our listeners, and as we rebroadcast this and put it on LinkedIn and our website and so on, and other websites and media, is I want to keep this to 15 minutes because everyone has busy days. But I want to thank you, Eric and Robert, for being on Next Move with Travis and Eric, and stay tuned. This will be a weekly with new guests, and thank you, Robert and Eric, again, and have a wonderful evening in the UK and afternoon in New York, Eric. And signing off is Travis McGregor and Robert Wakeling and Eric Maloney. Episode 1. Take care now, everyone.
Be well.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.